welcome back in, everybody. Let's go over this practice assessment. So that being said, let me share my screen here. Get the recording started.
Recording in progress.
Okay, perfect. So I've got my code on the right, my JavaScript file, and the browser's on the left here. So we can just start from the top. So the nice thing is they already gave you a event listener with DOM content loaded. So we can just basically write all of our code inside of this event listener. So one thing you'll notice is kind of a repeating pattern where basically what you're going to have to do is grab elements, based on their ID or using a query selector. And then we're going to, do something with those elements it gives us. So one way you could approach this is just, grab the elements they give you right at the start, and then you'll know, okay, I have access to the elements. Let's do something with them. So starting from number 1 here, they tell us there's this button with an ID of make circle blue and a div that is this blue border circle. So why don't we just go grab our elements first? So let's let our blue button equal, and then we're just going to use get element by ID. And we just pass in the make circle blue. Again, I'm just taking this from here, and I know it has an ID, so I can just use get element by ID. You definitely could have used a query selector as well, but I'm doing it this way. So then let's call this other one blue div. It also gives us the ID, and it's called blue border circle. And as far as debugging, the first thing you can do is just console log. If you believe you grabbed the correct elements, you can go ahead and console log them and see if it's what you expected. So in this case, there's that button and there's the circle. So now I know I have access to everything I need in this problem. So what do I have to do? I basically need to write an event listener that will change the class name. See, it says adding the blue fill CSS class. I could definitely see if you got a little confused thinking like, oh, do I need to actually add the CSS to make this blue? But really they already gave us that blue fill class. So we just need to apply it to the div, which should turn blue. So when we click this button, so when I say something like when we click this button, that means we're going to need an event listener. So let's call our blue button, add our event listener, and we're listening for a click. And what are we going to do? Let's just make a little anonymous function. All we're going to do is change this element's class to blue fill. So how can we do that? We can just say blue div, and we're going to give it a class name. And that's going to be blue fill. So let's try it out here, refresh our page, give it a click, and we're working perfectly. Awesome. See what's going on in chat. Jovan had used query selector, and then he chained on an event listener and just used another query selector. So yeah, definitely you could have done it that way. I'll try to show some of the others as like chaining our chaining, or like rather calling element by ID and then chaining the event listener right onto that. But either approach is definitely good here. Yeah, Malik, what's going on?
Does the class name override the previous class name, or does it just add another class name?
So if you notice, this blue border circle div didn't previously have a class. So we're just adding a new
class. It was an ID. Okay, got it.
Correct. That's the big thing to distinguish is realize if you're selecting something by a class or by an ID, because that's going to change the method you might use, such as Jovan used query selector, and he then, just pass in like hashtags. So we could have done like query selector and then just made this a hashtag. Let's see if that works for us. Still works. So as long as you're comfortable grabbing elements, you're like halfway there. Any other questions on problem 1 here? Let's do P1 for problem 1, and then I'll do P2 for problem 2. So let's just comment that out. All right, let's move on to problem 2 here. Will not check. So basically what we're doing is we're going to write, this is a checkbox. I think I demoed something like this earlier this week, where we need to prevent the behavior, right? Prevent the default behavior from occurring. So hopefully when you read prevent default behavior, you immediately thought that prevent default method we've discussed. So here's what I need to grab. So it has an ID of will not check. So kind of going off, you know, how Javon did it, we can just chain on, let's do get element by ID, document get element by ID, and let's pass in will not check. And rather than saving it to a variable, we could have also just chained on an event listener. So let's add our event listener, and we're going to listen for a click. In fact, let me drop this down just so we can see it all. Click. And we need to pass in that event because what we're going to be doing is preventing the default behavior of that event. So all we have to do here is just prevent default. So let's try it out, and we're rocking and rolling. So again, you could have, you know, saved this to a variable and then added the event listener on it. Either way, totally fine. And we talked about prevent default this week, where we just prevent the default behavior or something. So, you know, if you had a button you didn't want to, you know, I think we worked on that, like submitting a form, we like prevented the default on that. Yeah, Tommy, what's going on?
I guess I'm not following what exactly the E is in this case.
So add event listener, remember the first argument is going to be a string of the event we're listening for. The second argument is a callback function where the argument evaluates to the event. So I could have had something like, you know, I could have done a not fat arrow, like function this, but basically it's the callback function where the argument defaults to the event that occurs from the event listener. So why don't we go ahead and console log E and give this a click. And notice, right, we printed the event. It's an event object, and it has all these properties and methods on it. So there was the type, it was a click event. So that's what E is. Remember, you don't have to call it E, you could have called it event. Well, let's check it out. Still, oh, I didn't put it in event right here. Event. Let's take this out. You could have called it, you know, Apple. It doesn't matter. It's just whatever the event is will evaluate to this argument that's passed into our callback function. So a lot of times, like I originally had it, we just write an anonymous callback function passing in the event as the argument. In my fat arrow. Does that kind of help at all, Tommy?
I think so. So basically, the clicking is what you're preventing. It's not like something you're applying to the checkbox.
Exactly, because the default behavior of a checkbox is to just check it if you click it. So we're preventing that action from occurring when it's clicked. So I'm clicking and nothing's happening.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great question. Any other thoughts or questions on, yeah, Malik, what's going on?
Yes. Could you just explain that event one more time?
Sure. So again, we're selecting, in fact, why don't we just do it this way? We're selecting this input element and its type is checkbox. So the default behavior of a checkbox is to, check or uncheck if I click it. So what we do is we select this input. We then add an event listener listening for my click. And we know, like I mentioned previously, the default behavior of a checkbox is to, check the box. So let's take this out. Right? It checks the box or unchecks it. That's just the default behavior of a checkbox. We didn't have to do any code. That's just built in to HTML here. But we don't want it to check. It tells us prevent the default behavior of that checkbox from occurring. So again, we add the event listener on this input. We listen for my click. And then again, we have the second argument is a callback function. And the argument of the callback function will always evaluate to the event that occurs. And we can prevent the event's default action from occurring by calling prevent default on the event.
So the E is already included in the add event listener. And once the click occurs, it's saved in that event.
Right, like the event fires, so this becomes of actual value. Remember, it's just a variable. Like I said, I could have called it, Apple or whatever. It doesn't matter. It still does the same thing. It's just that when this event fires, the click event, the event object, which I console logged previously, is passed in as an argument to our callback function, so we can have access to it to do things like prevent default. Does that kind of help at all, Mal?
Yes, that made it make more sense.
Okay, awesome. Sweet. Any other thoughts or questions on problem 2 here? If not, we can move to problem 3. So problem 3 is this bananas today. So what happens when we click it? Nothing's happening right now when we click it. So what we're ultimately trying to do is make it so that when we click no, like imagine it's a website you built for someone and they want an easy button they can click so that users who come to their website say, hey, we don't have any bananas for sale today. That's kind of the objective. So when we click this button, we should change this to, no bananas today, it tells us. And then change the picture from the banana appearing to the banana with it crossed out. And they give you that image path right here. So again, let's go kind of my first approach, where the first thing I'm gonna do is just grab all of these elements because I know I'm going to have to do something with all of them. So let's let our no banana button equal, and we're just going to call document get element by ID, because again, always make sure you see what these are, right? They could be classes, maybe it's an attribute, but mostly we're going to deal with classes or IDs. So just make sure when you are choosing which method to use, you could have used query selector as well. You just know what you're trying to select your element by. In this case, we're trying to select it by our ID. And it is the change banana status, and that's status. And furthermore, hey, if you didn't know that this button had the ID of change banana status, what could you do? Come into your inspector, click the button, and check it out. There it is, the button with an ID of change banana status. So we've grabbed our first element. Now let's just grab the other ones. And since they're all IDs, I'm just going to copy this 3 times and just change, what the variable name is. So this is going to be my banana div, and its ID is bananas dash div. And the final one is my banana image. So let's just do image banana, and that's going to be banana images div. Banana image div. And, just to, again, if you aren't entirely sure if you're grabbing things correctly, it can save you a lot of time versus adding the event listeners by just console logging everything you grabbed. I think this is a good, proactive debugging step. So that way you see, okay, perfect. When you hover over it in your console, notice it even highlights, what you selected. So that's a really good proactive bugging tool to make sure you're selecting the correct elements. Oh, and Malik, is that an old hand or do you have a question off the bat?
It's an old one.
Okay, no problem. We'll keep on going. So again, I have everything selected. And what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to add an event listener to my button here because it says when you click the button below, here's what you're going to do. So let's go ahead and add an event listener to that button. So we can say no banana button, add event listener, and we're going to listen for a click because it's a button that we're clicking. And we, again, are just going to make an anonymous callback function passing in our event. I'll be even more explicit and call it event versus E. So what does it all want us to do? It wants us to, change the text here. So we can try just knocking that out. So it's saying, hey, take this element and change its inner text from bananas to no bananas today. So let's try knocking that out. So we can say our div banana, and we're going to change its inner text to no bananas today. And let's just try that out. Okay, perfect. So this is working, but we're not completely done because we need to also change the image here. It says also when you click the button, you should create an image element. And it even, a lot of times these readings are super helpful. They tell you explicitly what to do. So create an image element. So why don't we just do that at the start? So let's just let our new image equal, and we're going to create an element using the create element method. Element. Passing in an image because this is what we want to create. Let's try just console logging new image to see if anything happens. So let's click it and perfect. We can see I made an image tag. So again, that's kind of the proactive debugging option, just after you create something or grab it by its ID or a query selector, go ahead and console log it so you're at least creating it correctly, or at least when you click your button, you see it in your console. So we made a new image element, and it tells us we need to set the source attribute to this. So how can we do that on an image? If you remember from last week, we don't write source, we write new image src, and we just set that equal to this string here it gave us. So let's try this out. Cool. So that it doesn't look like we've appended our element to the document. So that's why we're not seeing anything render here. So why don't we go ahead and append our child to our, or rather we're going to append to the image our new image. So we can say something like image banana, append child, and it's going to be the new image. Let's try that out. And there we go. So again, what did I do? I created a new image. I set its source right to this picture. And then I just appended it to the div that holds the image. Now, there was one additional thing where if I click it multiple times, notice this red dot keeps going down. So it tells you as a bonus, hey, if there's already, right, if it's already been, if it already has this new image, we don't want to add anything else. So one way we could have done this is just wrapping our append image in an if statement. Basically, we're going to say, hey, if this div, banana images div, has children, it has a length, children has a length. So let's actually do it this way. Let's do console log image banana. So that's my div again. And I'm going to console log its children and its length. So let's just see this happen. So if I click it one time, we have no length. And then if I click it another time, we now have this length of 1. And that's where we don't want that to happen. So we only want it to put this cross out sign on our image if it is already there. So that's the wire we can throw in our if conditional where we can say, hey, if it already has a length, we don't want to do it. But if it doesn't have a length, we do want to do it. So let's just wrap that in that. Comment this out and see if it's working. And now when I click this multiple times, it's not adding more red crossed out images. Sweet. And that wraps up problem 3. So let's see what questions we have on this one. Yes, Lola, what's going on?
Would it also be a okay solution to do so that it only does it once within the add event listener, add another parameter or argument that's, I believe it's an object that says once true?
Oh, okay. So there's like a property on the event called once.
So basically on line 35, if you put a comma or wait, is that for the add event listener? Yeah.
But yeah, as long as you got the right solution and passed the spec, it doesn't there, you could do it multiple ways. So,
okay.
I was, but yeah, let's take a look at what you're doing. Or if you want, you can even send the code in chat and we can.
Okay. Was there a spec for the bonus part?
No, it didn't test you on the bonus specs. Let's do npm and then need to install.
Because I wasn't sure if it's doing it right or not.
Yeah, I don't believe there are specs for the bonus, but let's just check. Yep, there's no bonus specs, unfortunately.
Okay.
But if you like click it and you get that same functionality I have, you're going to be correct.
Okay.
Oh, awesome. So you were able to pass it here. Let's see if that works for me. Maybe my code would have to be refactored, but let's try it. And then I can take out my if statement. Yeah, that is totally cool. Very, very nice solution there. So it's like an argument we can add to an event listener to make it only happen one time. So that's really cool. I like it.
I'm still a little confused on the differences between inner HTML, inner text, and text content. Are they basically the same thing?
They're a little different in that inner HTML, I could have like created, remember, this is just a container. this div banana. I could have added, a H1 inside of it, and using inner HTML, that would be a good way to add an H1 inside, or, a P tag, or I could have added another div, and then inside that div, I could have added something. Whereas inner text just populates the space between, they're similar in that they populate the space like inside of the div, but inner text just adds text. Whereas inner HTML, I could add more elements here. And that was kind of that multiple choice question from last week. It's like, which method do we use to add children to an existing element? And inner HTML would be the answer, because we have a div and we could add, another div inside it. So that div would be a child of the outer div, for example.
Okay. And then text content and inner text is basically the same.
Yeah, I've never really even used text content, so we can look at that. Node text content. Text content in the node. Yeah, that sounds like it's going to be similar. In fact, why don't we just change it to text content? And yep, that works perfectly as well. Okay. We've just, I think, mainly gone over inner text and inner HTML, which is why I'm using those. But again, there's so many properties and methods you can see here that lots of ways to do things differently. And obviously we don't have enough time in our short little boot camp to go into depth in all of them. But if you find one that's useful, unless the assessment explicitly says you can't use a method, you definitely can. And I think as we go forward, there's going to be less and less of you can't use some existing method, right? That was more for mod 1 or mod 2, where we didn't want you to use the built-in sort method. We wanted you to write an algorithm that would sort. That was more of the purpose for preventing, explicit methods from being used. But as we move further and further along, especially getting into mod 4 here, it's basically free game as long as you understand what it's doing. However, that doesn't mean, you need to go in and memorize all these. We try to showcase the ones you're going to need right off the bat. And on the assessment, you might see something where it says, use this method we haven't talked about before. And so that is the assessment testing you to see, hey, if I don't know what inner text or text content is, am I able to find it in MDN and understand what it's saying, right? They're not going to throw something ultra complex, you've never seen add event listener before, have fun. It's going to be something like, hey, try using text content and don't use inner text. But that's just a test of, hey, are you able to use your resources like MDN quickly, just evaluate it and get the output you wanted. So kind of went on a little tangent there, but I think it was worth talking about. Is that helpful, Lola?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, great question. Malik, what's going on?
Yes, can you explain the line 31, if bang image banana?
Yep, so my image banana is this div. So if we click on this div, notice right now there is no children in this div, right? It's just a simple div. There's no child element. So when I click the button, now notice I have a child element here, which is this image I created. So what this if statement is doing is saying, hey, if there already is a child, or if there's not already a child, append that image. If there is a child, we don't want to append the image, because that was when we got to that functionality like this. It keeps dropping down because notice here, it just keeps adding images to this div as children. So what I'm doing is just checking to make sure it doesn't have, if it doesn't have a child, we add it. If it does, it doesn't add the image again. And Aurora was asking about remove event listener for seeing if it only happened one time. I think the way you would probably do that, Aurora, is similar to my if statement here. I could have wrapped this entire event listener in an if statement. I don't think, remove event listener would be potentially the best conditional to stop all this from happening. But hopefully that kind of makes sense, where I could have checked right off the bat if, there wasn't a length, and then this whole event listener wouldn't fire. Like if I wrap this whole event listener in some kind of conditional, you could have done that as well. Does that kind of help, Aurora, at all? Okay, cool. Got it. Sweet. So let's make sure. Yeah, we're good. Any other questions on problem 3 here? Really great questions we've got so far. Not, we can keep on moving along to our cookie problem. So again, we have 2 IDs. So I'm just going to grab these elements by their ID. So I want, let's call this our input cookie. And its ID is fave-cookie. And we're going to need one more element, which is the button. So let's just call it our store button. FAV. And its ID is store-cookie. Store-cookie. So again, I can proactively debug by just console logging my elements I selected to make sure I'm selecting the correct ones. Let's go to our console. Let me comment out my banana stuff. Let's do this, E3. So there it is. I've got access to the button, or the input rather, it's not a button, the input and the button as well. So the input and the button. Sweet. So I know I grabbed everything. So what do we need to do? We basically want an event where if we click this button, we store a cookie, or we store a cookie that will have a key of fave cookie, and its value will be whatever the input was added as. So let's just get that rolling first. So again, what are we doing? When we click the button, something's going to happen, which means we need to add an event listener on our button. So let's add an event listener. We're listening for a click. And let's write out our little anonymous callback function. All right, what are we going to do inside of it? We're going to create a cookie. So we remember how to create a cookie. It's something like document.cookie equals whatever we want it to be. So we could write it out here like the syntax again is the key name, fave cookie, and its value equals whatever the input values, the input cookie's value. So this input cookie is our input, whatever its value is. So let's do it actually this way. Let's do console log input cookie value. And now when I type here, let's see if we get anything. Okay, we're not seeing it print right off the bat. That's fine. I was hoping we could see it render, but it's going to be a little wonky. So we can do it this way. Here, input cookie value test. And there's our test printing. Test. So I know I have access to whatever I typed in here through input cookie value. And this is going to ultimately be, we can move back down to here. This is going to be that value we need. So I can do string interpolation and put input cookie value. So let's comment this out and give it a click. Let's make sure I spell everything right. All right, that looks fine for now. Let's try it out. So let's do test, store, input cookie, spelled it wrong. Input cookie. I was wondering why I was underlined. Okay, cool. So I just had a spelling issue. So let's try it one more time. Test, store my cookie. Let's go to my application here, my cookies. And there is my cookies. But the one thing it wants you to do as well, let's actually clear my page. Let's do test, store. Okay, let me try deleting them this way. Let's delete these cookies. Let's refresh this and let's click it. Now we can refresh this. And there is our cookie with a key of fave cookie. And there's my values. So we know we created the cookie, but we're not quite done yet because if I refresh the page, my cookie remains, but we want the cookies there, right? Which is great, but we want the actual text to remain in the field. So what we can do is, and remember, we want the, right? If I refresh the page, so if I had test here and I refresh, I would want test to remain in my input box. But notice that has nothing to do, right? We know we're storing the cookie, but having the input repopulate has nothing to do with an event. It's just if I refresh my browser, it goes away. So what we need to do is we know we have access to the cookie if I refresh the page. So we can just check to see, hey, if there's a cookie, let's grab it and put it here. So how can we check to see if a cookie exists? We just call document.cookie. So let's console log document.cookie. And let's go to my console. And there it is. Let's do test again. And we can see what's printing is this string here. I have fave cookie equals test. And what am I going to want to do? Let me refresh. I'm going to want my inputs value to be whatever that, value of the cookie was. So a few ways you could have grabbed that. So again, right, notice this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I'm working with. This is why console logging is so great, is you can see exactly what you're working with. So I have a string where I want to grab this part of the string. So how could we easily get access to this part of the string? We could use something like our split method. So let's let our favorite cookie equal, we're going to call document.cookie and split it at the equal sign. So let's console log favorite cookie now. Comment this one out. And now I have access, right, to the key name and its value, which is just this at index of 1 text, which is what I put in. So what do we need to do now? We have access to the value we want. We just need to add the inputs, update the inputs value. So we can say our, what's it called? Our nice little input cookie, which is this input box again. So input cookie, and its value is going to be my fave cookie at 1. And there it is. So if I refresh the page, test remains there. Awesome. So let's see what questions. And so again, notice though, my if statement is not inside the event listener because we don't want the cookie, or rather the input value, to only show up if I click the button. We want the button to store the cookie. And then if there's a cookie, we want it's the input's value to be the value of that cookie we stored. Said cookie like 100 times there, but hopefully you follow along with that. So let's see if we have some questions. Yeah, Malik, what's going on?
Cookies are stored as strings?
Yeah, when we call document.cookie, it is a string. So it's stored as a key value pair in
But
our
as
like,
a string. Okay.
or rather when we call document.cookie, it returns a string. Awesome. Any other questions or thoughts on our cookie problem here? If not, we can keep moving along. I guess this was problem 4. Did I skip a problem? Oh, no, I just mislabeled this. So this is P4. This was P3. Okay, good. P3, P4. We're now on problem 5. Who likes pies? So we have a class, an ID, and an ID. So why don't we go ahead and grab those? So I know I can use get element by ID. So I'm just going to take this and let's call it our input. So instead of input cookie, we can do the pie input. And the value is pie type. Pie type. And we have one other ID we need to select, which is the button, the pie button, or we can call it submit pie. And its ID is save pie. Let's make this smaller. Cool. And then one other thing I need to grab is this class pie list. So we don't use get element by ID. We use a query selector. So we can call document.query selector, and we can just pass in our nice class name, which is pie-list. And again, let's just proactively debug. You will pie input, submit pie. Oh, awesome. It's a little bigger. Cool. So we've got access to all of our elements here. That's great. So now we can go ahead and move forward with manipulating them. So what are we doing in this problem? When we click our submit pie button, it tells us blah, blah, blah. When the submit pie type button below is clicked, the value of the input box should be added to this list. So let's just try knocking that out. So we know we're going to have something on this button, which is my submit pie. So we can add our event listener there. Submit pie, add event listener. And again, we're listening for a click. Pass in our little anonymous callback function. And what do we want to happen? We basically want to create an LI where we're going to append the LI to this UL. So let's first, create our LI. So let's let our LI equal document create element. LI. And we're going to update. Well, we can even just make sure it's working. So we can console log LI. Let's give this a click, and we see it works. We're creating an LI, so we're on the right track. But what we need to do is set the LI's inner text to just be whatever the input value is. So how can we do that? We can say LI's inner text is equal to the pie input value. So let's try that. And we haven't finished yet, so I just put in test. submit. And now we see I have an LI where its inner text was my input valid. So the only other thing I need to do is I want this LI to appear in my unordered list, my UL. So we can just say UL, append child, and pass in that LI we created. So let's do blueberry, submit, and there is the blueberry pie we wanted. Awesome. Okay, and it also tells us the value in the input box should also be reset to an empty string after words. So we need to clear our, not LIs, but our pi inputs value. So how can we clear the value? We just reset its value to just an empty string. You can put that just for clarity. So now we can do, cherry, give it a submit, and it cleared. Awesome. So I think that's everything. Let's run the test. NPM test. I think that's everything less the bonus. So we can do the bonus next. Oh, maybe it doesn't like it. Add list elements to list. So still failing this test, so we can figure out where we're breaking on problem 5. So let me console log this stuff out. So we have our click, and then we're creating elements and we're appending them. And then it resets. So that looks fine to me. I wonder if it is trying to test our bonus to limit the number of pies here. So why don't we just go try that out? So again, we're creating an LI. We're setting the LI's value to whatever the input's value is. We're then appending the UL to the type of pies, and then we're clearing it. But let's do the bonus as well, where it says limit the number of pie types on the list to max at 5, not allowing the 6 to be created. So this is similar to the previous one we did where we checked, this div's length. So what we can do is basically in our event listener check to make sure that if our UL's children length is less than or equal to 4, and we're going to do less than or equal to 4, so that on the 5th time it will still work. So the 4th time it's going to work. So let me wrap all this in my if statement. So we're going to check for that, and we're going to just check to make sure there is a input value. So we can just say pi input value. This might be redundant, but we can test it out. So let's try it out now and see if we can make 5 pies, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the 6th time, notice it does not work. So that looks good to me there. Pi input is empty. It shouldn't be adding an LI. Okay, so then, yeah, perfect. Aurora put in chat why it wasn't passing. So this should have, that makes total sense. So like if you don't have an input, you shouldn't be able to submit anything. So that's where this conditional is going to catch it. So less the bonus, I could have just had this, and that should pass if we do npm test. Perfect. So that solves it without the bonus. We needed to make sure there was, in fact, an input, which is just a simple if statement. But then we can add in our bonus as well, just to make sure, hey, if the length is less than or equal to 4, we can add a 5th, but we can't add additional LIs. So thanks for that, Aurora. We're rocking and rolling on problem 5 now. So let's see what questions we have on 5. People feeling good about 5? We can move on to 6 then, which is save me some ice cream. So we have another storage problem where we're going to be storing not this time as cookies, but in local storage. So let's do what we've been doing, where we just grab all of our elements. So let's grab these. I'm just going to take this and change it. So we have fave ice cream. So we can just call this our ice cream input. Ice cream input. And its ID is fave ice cream. And then we have one other ID, which is the button. So let's just call it our ice button. And its ID is save ice cream. Go ahead and console log them to make sure we're selecting them. Ice cream input, ice button. And perfect, we have our input and our button here. So what do? We're basically going to add an event listener that sets an item in local storage. So when the button's clicked, which is my ice button, so when it's clicked, which means add an event listener listening for a click, when it's clicked, we want to go ahead and set an item in local storage. So you might remember some of those methods we had. In fact, if you forgot, you can always just do MDN local storage. Let's check it out and look for down here. And here are the methods. We have set item, get item, remove item, and clear. So set item. So again, right, if you're forgetting some of the methods you need to use, but you know you're using local storage, hopefully that rings a bell to where you can go into MDN, do exactly what I did, and then you'll see, oh yeah, I remember set item. That's how I set an item in local storage. So now that we've got that straightened away, let's do that. So we can say local storage, set item, and we want it to be, do they say explicitly what the key should be? I don't think so. All right, it doesn't tell us exactly what we want it to be, so we can just, that gives us freedom to add whatever. So let's just say, I don't know, ice cream. And its value is going to be the input's value, which is ice cream input value. So let's try that out. So we're going to do a test. Let's save it. Let's go to our application, check our local storage, and there is our ice cream. This favorite flavor is from a different practice. So I deleted that. There's my ice cream and its value was test. So that's working. However, when we refresh the page, let's see what happens. When we refresh the page, that favorite ice cream disappeared. So we want this input to remain if it exists. So very similar to the cookie problem, where we basically want to check to see if this exists in local storage. And how can we do that? We can use our get item method on local storage, which returns the value of whatever key we pass in. So let's let our current favorite equal, space this out a little. Our current favorite is going to be local storage get item, and we pass in the key, which I set the key as ice cream. So this should return the value. So let's console log it to be sure. Per fave. go to my console here. Give it a test. Oh. So we're not seeing current fave print. So let's local storage. Oh yeah, I put get item. It's like, why is that not showing? There it is. There's my test. And it immediately came back. So now I have access to this. So what do I need to do? I just need to say, hey, if we have something in local storage, so if there is a current fave, then let's just set that inputs value, my ice cream inputs value, to that value, current fave. And there it goes. Awesome. So very similar to the cookie one, but remember you can, check MDN if, these methods, you forget their names. Hopefully working through the practices, when you glance at something like this, you'll remember it and kind of recall how to use the methods. So any questions on problem 6 here with our ice cream? All right, people feeling pretty good about it. The next one is kind of a bigger problem. Well, there's a lot of elements going on, or rather, elements being selected. So let's just take our time, go through it, and see what we get. So working on problem 7, which is our fruit basket. So let's grab everything. So let's call it our apple is going to be our document get element by ID, passing in add apple. Cool. And let's get the other ones. So oranges, orange, and it's add orange. Then we have an empty basket. So we can say, let's just call it empty basket. And its ID is reset basket. Set basket. We have our fruit basket, which is also a div. So let's call this fruit basket. And fruit storage. And finally, we have one more, the pieces of fruit. So let's just put pieces fruit. And let's get, it's called total fruit. Total fruit. Again, we could, another one, but we could go ahead and console log all these. Apple, orange, empty, fruit, and pieces. And there they all are, and we can, hover over them, and looks like we've got everything rocking and rolling. We have access to all the elements now. So two things are kind of going on, right? If we click the add apple button or the orange button, it's going to add that kind of fruit to this basket. It wanted you to use the picture. So we could have, I just copied and pasted it. I think that was the easiest way. But if the images weren't rendering, it tells you use an A or an O or the full names. And then empty basket clears it. So few buttons we're going to have to add event listeners to, these 3. So let's go ahead and comment this out and get our buttons having some event listeners. So let's do Apple, add event listener, and we're going to listen for a click. Do our little anonymous callback function. Perfect. So before I do the orange, the apple and orange buttons are essentially going to do a very similar thing. It's just that the picture is going to be different. So I'm going to fill out my apple one first, and then just copy it over and change the picture to an orange. So when I click this button, what do I want to happen? I want this fruit basket to have an orange in it. Yeah, you could definitely have made the apple and the orange use the same. No, I think you might have to add 2 event. Yeah, you'd have to add 2 event listeners. You'd have to add 1 to the orange and 1 to the apples. Disregard. I think you were going to have 2, Josh, to answer your question in chat. Because you need to listen, like they're going to have the same functionality, so we can kind of copy and paste it. And maybe to dry it up, you could have like wrote out the callback function, but it's still a little different because they're slightly different. So it might be just more complicated to try to dry it up. And luckily it's not too complicated what's going on. So what do we have to do? We have to make this fruit basket. So let's inspect that. It's just a div. And what do we want to happen? We want it to have this apple picture when I click it. So how can we add an apple picture in here, right? That's not another element. We just want the picture. So we can use our nice little inner text. So we're going to have our fruit baskets inner text, and that's just going to be equal to the apple. But notice this probably isn't going to be exactly what we want. So let's just try that out. I think we actually put this in quotes. Nice. Add apple. So notice it's only working 1 time because every time it's just changing the inner text to this apple. So if I click it again, it's still just the apple. But what I want to happen is multiple apples to be created, right? So I want to add to my inner text. So how can we add to our inner text? Rather than doing equal, we can do plus equal. And now when I click it, we're getting lots of apples in our nice little fruit basket. Yeah, and Josh, because they're separate elements, exactly, for the event listeners. Awesome. So we're not quite done yet. So we have it adding the apples. That's working well. So our orange one should work well. Oh, yeah, Malik, what's going on?
Okay, how are you getting that apple image to show up?
I just copied it over to my VS Code. But if you were having an issue, if you were having an issue copying it, it tells you can just use letters. Like, so it would have been fine if you just did a.
I'm not doing.
That's totally a viable solution as well.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so the only thing I missed out on, so we know we can add apples and whatnot, but one thing we need to also be doing is having this pieces of fruit, increase by 1 every time some kind of fruit is added. So let's inspect this pieces of fruit. Okay, cool. So we have this span. So this span is what I selected up here called pieces of fruit. And we want its inner text to be the number of fruit we're adding. So when we start out, there should be 0 fruit in the basket. So what we can do is just say our span's inner text is equal to 0. Let's try to see what that does. There's the 0. But an easier way, we'll see shortly, of how we can make our inner text render correctly as we add more and more fruit is we can set a variable, just a global variable called fruit number, and set that equal to 0 to begin. And then we can just set our pieces of fruit equal to the fruit num. So we still have the 0 here, but inside of our event listener, we can just increment up that variable. So we can say fruit number plus plus. So now when I click the button, it should increase this to 1 and then update this. Let's see if that works. Oh, still not working there. So we're going to have to, oh, right, because I have to reset it. Boom. So let's do this. Bam. So all I'm doing is inside, right? Because it wasn't updating because it's only happening within the event. So I needed to explicitly update my inner text to be whatever that fruit number was. And now we're rocking and rolling there on my pieces of fruit. Yeah, Malik, what's going on?
Can you explain that again? Why did it work when you added pieces of fruit inside the add event listener?
Oh, because so when the DOM, the DOM content's loaded, all of the synchronous functions are going to happen immediately. So this, right, is not in any kind of asynchronous event or asynchronous action like an event listener. So when the DOM content's loaded, it says fruit number 0 and the inner text is 0. But when I click the button, like this code's already executed, so it's not going to update the inner text. However, when I click the button, I can explicitly update the inner text again. So like if we console log fruit num here and we click our button, let's see what happens. Console. Oh yeah, so it's not going to show because it's not within the event listener. So let's do it like this. And now we can see, hey, it is updating the fruit num, but we're just not seeing it render anywhere because this is asynchronous code, right? It only happens when I click the button. So we can see my fruit num's updating, but we needed also the display to update as well. So that's why we also have to explicitly tell our divs or the span's inner text to update to whatever the latest and greatest fruit number is. You see that going on?
Yes. So you don't have access to variables outside of event listeners. Like if you're updating or changing or modifying, you can't do that to variables that are outside the event listener.
So we are updating it. We're just not seeing it render in the DOM unless we put it in some kind of asynchronous thing like an event listener. So it technically is updating, but remember, right when the DOM content's loaded, all of the synchronous code just executes immediately. The asynchronous stuff hasn't happened. So this is only going to happen one time, but I can call it again within the event listener to keep updating it over and over and seeing it on the page. Does that kind of help, Malik?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Aaron, what's going on?
So if event listeners are asynchronous, does that mean that we can do like fetch requests and handle promises inside of event listeners without needing to declare the entire function as a asynchronous function?
If you're doing a fetch within an event listener, you would still have to have something like async await or dot then chaining, because fetches, remember by nature, when you create a fetch, that returns its own promise, which is asynchronous. So it's kind of like asynchronous things going on.
But I mean, so like, I understand the await and dot then, but you know how like when you make an asynchronous function, you have to say like a asynchronous function is equal to, etc., whatever you define it as asynchronous. So I don't have to do that inside. I'm asking if I still have to, because I over here I have, for the final problem, I have a function that I've defined as asynchronous, right? Because I have a fetch request and I'm handling it with awaits and dot thens. Do I need to have an asynchronous function if the event listener is inherently asynchronous?
So you will, because the event listener is asynchronous, but this callback function is synchronous. The way you get around that is you throw an async in front of your callback function.
Yeah, that's what I did. All right, cool. That makes sense. The callback is synchronous. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. What it was.
Yeah. great question. And if people didn't follow along, we're going to get to that async one in a second as well. But yeah, great point there. So we got, again, falling back to this, we have our apples working. So let's get our oranges working as well. So it's going to be the same thing, but we're going to pass in orange, and we're going to change our picture to the orange. And let's try that. Cool. So we can add apples and oranges. The final thing we needed to do, though, we're not quite done because we need to fix our empty basket, and then there's a bonus as well. So empty basket just tells us, right? So let's add our event listener on that. It's a button that should basically clear our inner fruit basket's inner text. So let's go ahead and add the event listener to our empty basket. Add event listener. We're going to listen for a click. And let's just make our little callback. So what can we do? We want it so that when we click this button, it empties this. So let's look at this. So we have a div, and then inside of it is this fruit storage. So how can we update this? We have fruit basket. Let's just see if we can clear the inner text of the fruit basket. So let's say fruit basket's inner text, kind of like how we cleared things previously, is blank. Let's try this out. And it's working nicely. The only thing that isn't is my pieces of fruit should also reset. So what can I do to update that? I can just update my pieces of fruit explicitly. It's inner text. And that's just going to be equal to 0. So now let's add my pieces of fruit is going up. I empty the basket. It's now 0. Oh, so that isn't the functionality we wanted because when I clicked the button, it reset. So we're going to instead probably want to do something like fruit num and then set fruit num. Okay, so here's what happened here. So because I just saw the solution, but let me talk through what I saw. So notice I was clicking it and it looks like it's correct so far. And when I click empty basket, it sets it to 0 because of line 111. But when I click add apple again, it jumps to 7. So this is happening because remember, add apple increments fruit num, which is this variable here, and then sets the inner text to that value. So even though all I did here was set the inner text to 0, I didn't update my fruit num. I have to reset my fruit num as well, which we can simply just reset fruit num to 0 and then set, instead of this being equal to 0, this can be equal to my fruit num. So let's try that out, empty it, add, and now we're rocking and rolling there. Awesome. So that is everything except the bonus. Yeah, Malik, what's going on?
When it jumps to 7, is it tracking the number of times you clicked on add apple?
Correct, because remember, add apple is incrementing this fruit num value. And how I had this previously was I was just setting pieces of fruit inner text to 0. That doesn't change fruit num from whatever we incremented it to. So when I clicked add apple again, it added another number to whatever was already existing on fruit num and set it equal to fruit num. So what I had to do was say fruit num is now 0 and the inner text is that fruit num. I mean, I guess I could have had 0 here as well. Let's try it out. Boom. Yep, that works as well. Did that help, Malik?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So the final thing was limiting the number of pieces of fruit that can be out of the basket, 25. So that's just as simple as adding an if statement in our event listener. We can just say, hey, if the fruit num is greater than or equal to 25, what do we want to do? We don't want to do anything. We just want to return out of the function. So we can throw that in our orange one as well. Again, remember, we're tracking fruit num out here. So no matter where I click, once I get to 25, it shouldn't add any more, and it worked nicely. Awesome. So that concludes this apple orange one. Let's see what questions we have. This was kind of a chunkier one, so definitely let's take a second to pause and see if we have any questions. All right, if there's no questions, we can move on to part 8. So this is no bubbles, bubble maker. So when we click this, there shouldn't be bubbles. Hopefully the name of this kind of hinted at, you know, if it rings a bell when we were talking about bubbling events earlier, we talked about a method to, you know, stop the bubbling, which was, right, it's going to be our stop propagation. So this is kind of a, you know, they even kind of hint at stop bubbles. So we're going to be using stop propagation. So let's grab our element. In fact, we can do it this way. Document get element by ID. And the ID is bubble maker. Bubble maker. And what do we want to do? We want to add an event listener listening for a click. And what do we want our little callback to do? Like I said previously, we just want to stop the event's propagation. So we can just say e.stop propagation invoked. Let's try it out. And now we're not bubbling up. So this was a method we talked about at the beginning of the week. I would definitely, you know, be comfortable if you get a problem similar to this. Be comfortable with your stop propagation. Definitely be comfortable, you know, using a prevent default. Typically, your prevent defaults are going to, you know, prevent some kind of click like that, and stop propagation is going to be some kind of bubbling problem. And then all the others are mostly going to be clicks, but they might throw another event at you and say, hey, just look up this event on MDN really quick and see how to use it. You'll probably have maybe like one like that. But if you're comfortable with everything we've done so far, you're in really good shape. But if you're not, if you're still a little struggling, the practice assessment is by far the best resource this week. So, you know, going through this a few times, figuring out where you need to ask questions and where your pain points might be and trying to focus in on that. Kind of a little tangent there, but let's see if we have any questions on problem 8. We might not have enough time to finish 9 until after lunch, so let's just see if we have anything on 8 so far, problem 8. All right, if we're feeling good on 8, we can go to 9, and I will stop us before lunch, so we're not going to run into lunch. We'll come back from lunch and continue on. But for now, let's just get going. So again, we have 2 IDs. So let's let our fetch button, we're going to call it our fetch button. And we're just going to get the element by ID. Oh, right. Let fetch button equal document get element by ID with a dictionary fetch. Hopefully I spelled it correct. You remember, if you have spelling issues, you can always just try copying and pasting directly from the assessment. I know I run into those all the time. And the other thing we have is basically a display area. So when we click a button, we're going to display some data here. So let's let we can call it result area equal, and we're going to get the other element, get element by ID, results area. So again, I can console log these just to make sure. Go in here to my console, and there's my button and my results area. Cool. So what we're doing is making a fetch to this free dictionary API. So kind of gave you a preview when Aaron asked his question about async, but we're going to be making a fetch within our event listener. So when we click the event listener, it's going to make a fetch. So let's add our event listener to our button. So when we click it, we're going to be doing an event. But if you remember, like I said previously and kind of talked with Aaron, we're going to be making a fetch. And remember, fetch returns a promise, which is asynchronous in nature. So rather than .then chaining, I'm going to use async await on my fetch. And Forrest asked about a Kahoot. We will have a Kahoot probably after lunch, after we finish number 9. But let's just keep on going as far as we can up until lunch here. All right, so I've got this set up. So what are we doing? We know when we make a fetch, right, we're going to make a fetch to some URL. So let's go to this API. And on your assessment, you might have something similar where notice they don't explicitly tell you to where to make the fetch to, right? They don't give you the URL. They give you the place and they say, hey, you should just check through the documentation to see where or like what you should be fetching or how to make the fetch. So let's go back to the README, and it tells us when you click on this, you should fetch it, make a fetch to this. The request should return the results for the word dictionary. And then it says use the documentation. So we look at the documentation. Luckily, the second thing tells us exactly where we're going to want to make our fetch to. It says, as an example, if you wanted to get the definition of the word hello, you'd make the fetch to this. Well, it tells us, so let's let our URL equal this in a string. But it tells us we don't want to get the definition for the word hello. We want to get the definition for the word dictionary. So we can just change, instead of looking up the definition of the word hello, we can just look up the definition of the word dictionary. So that's going to be the URL that I make the fetch to. What else? In fact, we can kind of skip ahead and just see if the fetch is working. So remember, when we make a fetch, we can save the response object to a variable called res, for example. And how do we make a fetch? We can await our fetch and pass in our URL. So let's console log res and see if we're getting anything. So let's go fetch, and nice, it looks like it worked. I have a response object. Now, if you look into your documentation, it shows you that the body of the response is going to be something like this, which is actually what we want. We won't want just the response object with the status codes and headers. We want the body. So remember this readable stream we saw a few weeks ago? So how do we get the response body out of the response object? We can just use, or like, let's let res body equal, and if you recall, we have the asynchronous res JSON method, which returns a promise that evaluates to the parsed response body. So now if I console log res body here, give it a click, we get this nice little object that we saw here. License, meanings, phonetics, source URLs. Okay, there's quite a bit. Word. So parts of speech. Okay, so what we needed was the definition. Return the results for return the results for the word dictionary. So here's our definitions. Make it a little bigger, right? We can see, there's many definitions and other properties we can kind of sift through. It might be easier to sift through this where you could see, oh, hey, I just need the definition, for example. But that's a nice stopping point. We just got the response body. So let's pause there because we're right at lunch. And we'll come back after lunch, finish part 9, and we will have a Kahoot later today. So let's go ahead, take 30 minutes for lunch, and I'll see you all after to finish up this practice.